Welcome to the Weird Learning Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Tracy Dix and Dr. Alex Patel, with special guest, Kia Morant. Today's episode, In Conversation, Study Tips with Kia Morant.
Hello and welcome back to the Weird Learning Podcast. It's me, Alex Patel, and my good colleague, Tracy Dix, and we're here with Kia Morant to talk about something which often makes students struggle a little bit. So how to really succeed in your studies. Quite often, this is study skills, which can be a bit boring, but not today. We're going to look at it in a lot more detail and think about the techniques and practices and ways of working that will really help you succeed at university.
Let's spend a little bit of time talking about, Kia, what your course is like. But first of all, could you please remind us again, what course you're studying?
I'm studying politics and economics at Aston currently, and I did study politics, philosophy and economics at Goldsmiths University.
So now that you've got experience of studying at two different types of universities, let's talk a little bit about what the teaching format is and how you've kind of managed them differently according to the different types of assessments. So shall we start with Aston first of all? So how is your course taught mostly at Aston?
Okay, so we do our lectures primarily online. So each week we'll get, it depends, about 3 different recordings split into sections, and then we'll get reading, obviously, for these, and then we'll also have a seminar, but that's done at the university.
Okay, so you're saying reading, so is that a reading list?
Yeah.
So how many bits of reading do you tend to have on a list like that?
Depends on the module. Some are quite nice. Some will give us an actual workbook, but then I think that lends itself to economics. And then for politics, it can range, depending on the week, it can be between 2 to 4.
Okay.
Items of reading.
Yeah, but it depends if it's a book or if it's articles, or sometimes I put news stuff in there because it relates exactly to what we're doing.
And do you get guidance about how to go about approaching these? So if it was a book, do you get guidance from the lecturer on what to do with it?
They'll tell us what part to look at, but we haven't actually been told how to read in terms of academically.
It sounds strange.
It sounds weird to say,
Yeah.
But no one's actually told us what to look out for, how to read it, which I think would be useful.
Yeah, it would be useful.
Yeah.
But it sounds from, our conversations before, you've figured a lot of that out already. So how do you approach your reading list?
I usually so when I'm reading just for the week and not because of an essay or an assignment, I'll just kind of go over it, look for things that relate exactly to what we've done in the lecture, look for where they talk about other authors that I think will be interesting to look at another time if I'm going to answer an essay on anything to do with this week.
Yeah.
And then they release what sort of thing we're going to talk about in our seminars. So I'll look for things that relate to what we're going to talk about in the seminar. But I kind of skim read it at first to see exactly what bits are useful, and then I'll go and read them properly afterwards. Because it could be quite a lot of reading.
Yes, I think that's absolutely key. So you are focusing, aren't you? You're, instead of just going in and starting off at page 1 and reading the whole thing and thinking, I need to memorize all of this, which was what I used to do. And it's very stressful, never finish.
And boring.
You're thinking, what do I need to get out of this? Is it linking it to the lecture? Is it preparing for the essay? Is it preparing for the discussion? And pulling out those key bits of information and reading those bits in a lot of detail. That sounds really, really helpful.
And from what you said to us in a previous episode as well, you're very keen that, the things you study and the issues you explore in your course are of, your own interest. You're not just kind of expecting or relying on, your tutors to teach you everything you know about politics and economics. You really want to make it your own, and you really want to kind of forge your own path with the discipline. And I think that can be a really helpful perspective to have as well, because you're getting what you want out of this university experience rather than having to do these assignments that someone else has set for you and having to figure out what do they want from you so you can get a first, but you're finding your own interest and approaching things in a way that, lights you up and gives you purpose. And along with that, you're going to do a lot better as well, because, you actually want to do the reading and the studying rather than having to slog through it.
Yeah, no, I do. I'd agree that I think it helps to enjoy what you're doing. But also, if you don't necessarily enjoy the module or the topic you're doing for that term, it also helps to just find something in it that you like and then try and answer whatever you can on that. Because I've found personally that when you are doing an essay or an exam or something that you find interesting, you're going to do a lot better.
A lot better.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
And modules are usually very kind of conducive for doing that as well, because you, like most modules, would kind of touch on a different topic each week. And then when it comes to the assessment, they'll give you a choice, so it's never like one set question or anything like that. There are usually options within it. So you can definitely focus on, things that resonate better with you than others. And I mean, so I have admission here, but when I was at uni, I was not always that conscientious. And so you had the weekly reading. And what I often ended up doing, because I studied English and there was a lot of reading to do, was I sometimes ended up, especially with modules I disliked, like linguistics, I often ended up doing the weekly reading if I knew I was going to use that as in my assessment. That's not necessarily what I'm telling people to do, but sometimes it happens and you get through it.
So once you've done a bit of reading, how do you capture that information? How do you do you make notes based on this?
Yeah, I usually make notes on a laptop, on a Word document. I think it's much easier to do it that way, because then you can go in and edit it later if you're going to use it, rather than having it on paper, because it's just doubles the workload.
Copy and pasting?
No, don't do that. That would be terrible.
Why would that be terrible?
I don't think that you get anything from it if you do that. It's just like information that was already there, not somewhere else. I'd try and reword it, or I'll read it and then close it and then write about it so that it's my own understanding of it. Or I'll write what I think about something. So if they've got an idea in there, I'll write whose idea it was and then what I think about it. So I've already kind of got the bones of something that can actually be used later, rather than just
copying
someone's work.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really great way of looking at it. Okay, what about referencing and citations? How do you stay on top of those?
I'm really bad for that. That's like the last thing I do. And every time, you've got to do this earlier, but I don't. But I keep it in my notes where I'll write down whose work I'm citing, and then I'll have my notes underneath where it says whose and the title, so that I can go to, there's someone online called Sites for You. Yeah. And I'll do it all on there quickly, so it doesn't take too long. But it's something I think that you should do while you're writing. Don't do it at the end, but I never follow that advice personally.
No. But I think as long as you keep a record, you should be able to catch up on it. So for most assignments up to 4,000 words long, say, you can probably keep up with your referencing if you do it how you've described. But yeah, when it comes to dissertations, you might want to kind of do it as you go along, and that's to come.
Would that be using some form of technology?
Sometimes, but the technology, so what the technology does for you in terms of your referencing and bibliography still needs to be checked. And I mean, back in the day when we were students, there was no technology for doing any of that. And we got on fine. So I think it's often a personal preference thing, because when it comes to using technology like EndNote, for example, to help you with your referencing, you have to invest a bit of time in figuring out how it works and what its kind of pitfalls are. So I think it's up to the individual whether they want to do that. I can be a bit of a control freak with certain things, and if there's something if I'm using a tool and I don't completely understand what it's doing to my references, I would rather do it myself. What do you think of it, Alex?
When I was at university, we did have the technology. We were at the university at the same time, but
different universities.
I was in a sciencey area, so they taught us to use RefWorks, Ref Manager, whatever it's called.
Okay.
And so I would just be like downloading all these abstracts onto this database, not being selective. I would just have like hundreds, never actually read the papers because I wasn't being selective.
Yeah.
So, you know, the database just became a huge unwieldy thing. And then when it came to actually outputting the references as a list using the correct citation format, that was really, really difficult back in the day. But nowadays, when I write an academic article, it's quite often around education, I use a small number of sources generally, and really focus on those, go into a lot of detail. And so, you know, I just do it by hand, actually. Yeah.
So, okay, talking about a small number of sources, what could be £1 million question for a lot of students, and something we get asked a lot, is how many items in your reference list or bibliography should you include in your assignment? Kia, do you have a response for that?
My friends at uni seem to think this is excessive. I think that this is the right amount, but for every 100 words, I'll try and have at least one.
Okay.
So if I'm doing a 1,500 word essay, I'll have at least 15 references, but sometimes I do a bit more. It's not always going to be.
Okay, so how many references would you say is the right number for an assignment?
So I usually have about 1 per 100 words. And that's because when I'm structuring it, for each point, I'll do like a overview of the area of what I'm talking about. So there'll be like a mini literature review, where I'll talk about the work or the theorists that I'm discussing, the works that have followed, the people that counteract what they say. So each of them will come with a reference because you're discussing their works, or one or multiple.
Yeah.
And then I'll use more references later on for evidence of what I'm saying. So even if it's a statistic or I'm describing a situation and I need to use someone else's work to discuss that. So by the end of it, say there's a 2,000 words essay, I'll usually have about 20 references for that.
So you were telling us earlier that you think, like, some of your fellow students think that's a little bit excessive. Like, so how many sources do you think they include? Do you have any idea?
I think quite a lot of people will include all the ones on the reading list for what they're discussing. Yeah. And they'll have some for like evidence, and they'll have a couple of articles that they found. So usually around 10, 15, something, maybe less.
Or like a 1,500 word essay.
Yeah, but maybe not that much even then. It depends who you're speaking to, but usually it sounds like I've got the most out of the people that I know, which I don't know. I don't think it's that excessive personally, but.
So I guess the answer to that question is there isn't really a definitive number. And that's why it's a question that's quite difficult to answer, because when someone, you know, a lot of students approach us and they want like you should have 10 or you should have 15, but really it depends on the type of sources that you're using as well and how you engage with it. And really what academics are often looking for is your engagement with those debates. So from what you're saying, you know, you have kind of scoped the topic that you're like engaged with at that point in time, and you know all the current debates, and you're familiar with like seminal pieces of work. So maybe publications that are a lot older, but that people have kind of cited and, you know, drawn on since then. So they're very important in some way. And then, you know, like from there, you kind of reviewed where the sort of scholarly discussion is around your topic up till now. And then you found like other bits of evidence like data or, you know, interviews or whatever, you know, because some other pieces of work might not be properly published if it's too new, for example. So you've looked at those sources of evidence and then draw your own conclusions from that. And I mean, from what you're saying, you know, I don't think your course mates are doing anything wrong either, but they've just taken a different approach to it. So I guess, you know, the message for students who are listening to this podcast is, as long as you are demonstrating some criticality and, you know, some original ideas come out of, you know, the resources that you've looked at for an assignment, then you're doing what you've been asked. Like, that should be fine. And there are no kind of right or like, there are no definite right or wrong answers when it comes to how many sources do you need for like 1,000 word or 2,000 word essay.
Yeah. And if that's has made you kind of think, well, what is criticality? I'm sure we'll be doing a podcast on this in the future where we go into some different types of questions that you might ask to develop your critical analysis of something.
Yeah, we'll look at some essay topics, but also Kia has talked about a little bit about criticality, in terms
that
of
was a really good
your
explanation.
note taking, and how you were saying that you don't copy down quotes, you don't copy and paste, you write your own perspective, like your own take on what's been said, and how it's inspired you, and kind of other reactions like that. If you found the information in our podcast useful, please share your aha moments by either tagging us at weird.learning on social media or telling us in a DM. We'd really love to hear from you so we can share even more helpful tips. Feel free to ask us questions about your uni assignments, and we'll be sure to address them in future episodes or on our socials. So do follow us and/or subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss new content. Finally, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, please tell your friends about it and consider leaving us a review on Google, iTunes, Spotify, or whichever platform you use, so that we can reach and help more people. It also means that we can make this podcast even better. If you email us a screenshot of your review, we'll also enter you in a weekly prize draw to win a half-hour study consultation with us, completely free. More information is available in our show notes. So if what we've covered in this podcast so far has been helpful, please get in touch and tell us, what has resonated most with you so we can kind of do more of that. Be sure to tell your friends, so share the podcast with your friends so that, more people can get the kind of help that they're looking for. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode when a new one comes out. And do consider leaving us a review as well on iTunes or Apple Podcasts so that it helps us to reach more people and make the podcast better.
I'd like to go back to lectures and note making. So we talked about doing notes for reading, but what's it like in a lecture? How do you go about making notes in that situation? Or do you?
Well, I do. I did more when I was at Goldsmiths because it wasn't recorded. So everything that they said, I was kind of like...
Okay. So can you explain what you mean by that? So what does it look like, or what's it feel like to go to a lecture?
Well, for Goldsmiths, at least, I would be sat in a row, and there was lots of rows of seats and someone at the front with a whiteboard, but a lot of the time a whiteboard, a projector. But usually it depended on the lecturer, because sometimes they didn't actually use it. They were like quite old school. They've been teaching the same lecture for a long time, and they would just
rock up, sit on the desk at the front
and speak to us.
Yeah, I had a psychology lecturer who did that.
And see, and that's why it's so important to collaborate with students and like shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, so I would write extensive notes then, but I think I came to realize that wasn't necessarily the most useful, because I wouldn't use a lot of it and it wouldn't actually help me. I wasn't necessarily had a very good flow to it because I was writing so quick that I was kind of missing stuff, and I was like, oh, I'll come back to that. No, I never did. So I'll come back to it a month later and be like, oh, I don't know what I was trying to say. So now at Aston, all my lectures are recorded. I can download the PowerPoints as well, and then they've got like a transcript, so I don't feel the need to write so extensively. I kind of just write what I think is interesting, or if the lecturer says something that isn't written down on the actual PowerPoint that I think I'll forget and I won't think to look at that, I'll make sure that I write that down exactly as they say it. It helps to be able to rewind it and go back over it.
So what do you do with the notes once you've done this? Like, what do you use them for?
I look back over them when I'm going to be doing my essays or my assignments. So I'll review them as part of as my revision, I suppose. But I keep them quite particular. So I've got a file on my laptop for each module, and then I've got a file for each week. And then in that, I've got a file for the lecture, the seminar, and the reading, which is a bit extensive, but it kind of keeps everything in order.
Very sensible.
So do you kind of use Windows files? Because we were talking about Word documents earlier. You don't use any apps for note making, like Notability or anything?
Just Word.
Just Word? Well, it does the job. I used Word a long time ago.
I used pen and paper and ring binders.
Yeah.
Lugging around all these ring binders. Oh, it's terrible.
Okay, so something that your mum mentioned to me a while ago, which I was very impressed about, she was telling me that you listen to things like podcasts when you're studying, but also she was telling me that you kind of do your writing at the same time when you're listening to those podcasts. And I was very impressed by that level of multitasking. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so usually I'll listen to podcasts or documentaries or even interviews with people, depending on what I'm doing. If it's politics, it helps. But on the subject of the topic that I'm doing the essay for, the assignment, and I'll do it while I'm planning it out, not while I'm actually writing the essay, because that'll be a bit too intense having someone speak at the same time. But it kind of just helps while you're trying to plan things out, have people coming up with ideas that you can look into more, or they might say something that like sparks a bit of more inspiration into what to discuss. So I think it's quite useful to do like a wider range of research rather than just reading.
Yeah, and before we started recording, you were telling us that you kind of listened to lectures from other universities as well. Like, what gave you the idea to go and look for them?
I first did that because we had a module that was basically international relations, and I had never done it before. And my lecturer didn't really make a big deal about the fact that this is international relations. So when I was doing reading and kept seeing all these international relations terms, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's a whole different subject topic here that we're not getting all the theorists for, we're not getting all the keywords for. So I just started watching this lecture series by this, I can't remember his name, it was this lecturer from, I think it was the University of Philadelphia. It was very good. And I took lots of notes on that. When he suggested a reading, I wrote it down and I'd do the reading. But it's something I still do now, maybe on a specific topic that we haven't looked at uni. So I've watched lectures on apartheid. I've watched lectures on like things that we haven't specifically covered in detail, just to get more of a range of knowledge on it so I can look further into.
And the great thing there is you're going to experts on this. You know, if they're employed by a university to be teaching on a degree, it means they have some expertise in this area. Do you use Wikipedia at all?
I do use Wikipedia, but
what do you use it for?
I look at the authors that they've cited. So I'll go and have a look at all the works they've used, and then I'll read that, and then I'll have a look at what works. I love to look at the citations and all the books I reference as well.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so let me look at this person. Yeah.
People call that a citation trail, don't they?
Okay, maybe. Have you ever included something from Wikipedia in your reference list?
No, I don't think I've ever done that.
Why not?
It was made very clear to us at the beginning of each uni I've been at that you should not do that. So I never
That's
did.
really interesting, isn't it? So, okay, I mean, we can discuss that a little bit more later on in like another episode. I think universities like to keep things simple for students, and, you know, like coming from like the school system where there's sort of harder and faster rules as to what you should and shouldn't do in your assessment, like that can be more reassuring to students, like what not to do. So it's almost, I guess it's almost safer to tell students don't reference Wikipedia. We have had someone else kind of say, you know, if you have used Wikipedia as a source, then you should just reference it. But opinion is very mixed on that. And on the whole, I think I've come across more academics who say don't use it than ones
definitely.
who do. Yeah.
But sometimes people just use Wikipedia to get an overview. It sounds like that's a bit like what you do, but you don't rely on it. You have to rely on really concrete pieces of research or analysis.
Peer-reviewed work. Yeah. You know, there is no harm in using Wikipedia as like the kind of building blocks for your understanding of something before you develop the argument.
Before you go into it further.
Yeah. So I can't remember if it was in the previous episode, but you were talking about having to do group work at uni. Do you enjoy group work?
I don't.
Why is that?
I got the impression you did from what you were saying before.
I've enjoyed being able to meet people.
Yeah.
It's been extremely stressful. I think I just have a standard of work that I like to put out, and you can't tell people to do things the way that you do them, or you can't tell them that they have to they can't do what they're doing because it doesn't sound like it's gonna fit conclusive. You know, you can't be mean, and I don't want to be mean, but I'm also very like, I want to get this grade, so it's it's a difficult.
It's a negotiation.
It is a negotiation. So it's very common at universities when you talk to academics about, when they set kind of group work assignments, students usually hate it, and often for the reasons that you say. Students kind of complain that other people aren't pulling their weight or whatever. But I guess part of it is that what academics are trying to do is create a kind of real world assessment, like a real world situation. And students might study together, but it's a bit of a different situation when you're asking a group of students to kind of come together on like a deliverable, like something where there is a lot at stake. But often is the case kind of even in work environments that people sort of pull their weight differently, and there are lots of other dynamics at play. And I think that is part of the learning experience and part of how do you navigate that in order to deliver the results. So I'm curious, what do you do? Like you say, if your fellow students are kind of going off and doing their own thing, how do you kind of address the things that kind of don't sit well with you?
Well, I've gone through lots of different situations that have made me understand how to be better at that, because at one point I literally just redid it and said, guys, this was not good. I didn't want to be mean, but I was like, this isn't working. They're like, yeah, we know. And I'm like, well, I've done this. And I sent it in, they're like, oh, thank you. And I'm like, of course you're thanking me. That's great. And then we've done wow, but that's not good for you because you're doing the workload of 3 people in a really short space of time. Yeah, they're not learning how to do things correctly.
But did they, when you were saying about being mean or not being mean, so it sounds like your course mates at least didn't think you were being mean because they thanked you for it. And at the end of it, because they got a higher grade, it sounds like they were fairly happy with that.
I think they didn't think I was being mean because I didn't tell them up front that what they've done isn't good. I don't want to be rude, but it wasn't good. But there was a case of plagiarism because they'd actually wrote stuff down that I had read the source for, and it was word for word.
Something to watch out for in a group project, because plagiarism at universities often has penalties. So if there's a case of that, then it can mean consequences
for the entire group.
But
that's the value of the group dynamic, because you picked it up and you corrected it, and potentially as well you've helped your fellow student, because kind of going forward with their individual work, they would hopefully understand your corrections.
Did they learn from that?
Did you tell them you changed it?
I'm trying to remember. When I think I might have told them that I've read that. I wasn't upfront, I can see you've copied and pasted, but I was like, this is very close to the original source, which wasn't actually an academic journal either. It was a news article, and they'd copied and pasted a large chunk of it too. So it wasn't great.
Not ideal on several levels.
No.
But you said you'd learned from this experience.
Yeah, so I had a similar experience again, where I didn't like the direction. I didn't feel like what we were doing was actually very academically sound. It just was going so off-piste. So
can you remember what it was?
I'm trying to remember now.
Okay, no, don't worry about that.
It was an essay. It was a group essay. I think we had altogether, it was 4,000 words. We had 4,000 words each.
Yeah,
and it was very fragmented. People weren't attending the meetings. It was not great. But we kind of got together and we're like, okay, so what exactly are you doing? What exactly are you doing? And it just was not, it didn't fit together. It wasn't going to flow well. It just wasn't hitting everything it needed to do. So I kind of, instead of what I would have done if it was down to me, I would have just done the whole thing. And then I would have sent it to them and said, do you like this? But it's not good for me. It's not good for anyone else. So we had another meeting. I made sure everyone attended, and then we just spoke for a really long time about what we're going to do. I went through the objectives with them, and I was like, this is why this isn't going to fit that. This is why this isn't going to fit that. And then we kind of came up with an idea of how else we were going to approach it, and then we went off and did it, and it did actually.
It came together.
Well done.
Yeah. Well done. And but so what's coming out of all these experiences that you're not enjoying is there's quite a lot of growth happening, because you are starting to realize probably that you've got some quite strong leadership skills.
I didn't think, I guess I do.
Yeah, you do, because you facilitated these meetings and talked about things for a long time and made sure everyone understood, and then it came together and they were able to contribute as well. And I think you're realizing early on, and a lot of kind of adults, I would say, people who are older still struggle with this. that you had trouble delegating initially and kind of trusting other people to kind of get on with the work, but now you've learned how to support them through it, so it helps you to avoid overwhelm. And so you don't, in future when you go into a professional environment and so on, you will not be tempted to kind of just take on the work of other people and just do it for them, because obviously that's going to lead to burnout. You can't do it all the time. So yeah, I think valuable life lessons coming out. I think the group work has served its purpose.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it took a while to get there,
but a lot of life lessons are tough, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. But facilitation is a really useful skill to develop.
Okay, so I wrote this question really early on, and I think we can cover it now. So what has been your biggest inspiration in terms of influencing how you study and prepare for assessments?
So and it's interesting for me because I wouldn't say I've necessarily seen something that's influenced how I do it. I think it's just been kind of learning over time, because at school I was also kind of like, I was the type of person where I didn't have to try very hard to do well, so I didn't try hard at all. I don't think I revised until the last week for my GCSEs, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's really bad, and actually for everyone that I know that has had the same thing, they've really struggled as they've progressed, because you're so used to it, and then you get to uni and it's just like, it's not going to work. You can't.
So would you say you've struggled at uni because of being like naturally talented or naturally good at certain things?
I think I realized at the end of A levels they wasn't working anyway. I think that was like a lot of work, and I was like, okay, you can't keep coasting and then trying. So I was already prepared for that at uni, but I think it hit me very quickly how much work I was actually going to have to do to do well. It wasn't just knowing, you had to expand on what you know. So you couldn't just coast by. So I kind of just, I think I watched some videos on YouTube of like other students and how they suggested that you should go about preparing for essays, just your reading, your note taking, all of this. And it didn't necessarily work for me, but I think it was really good to see other people's opinions on what you should do, because you can try it and then you can find out that that's not how you should. I don't know if there's anything else that really inspired the way that I work now. I think it was just trial and error.
So you have exams, is that right?
I do, but they're all 24-hour exams so far.
Yeah. So how do you prepare for those?
I'll look at the spec, what they say that we're going to do, how many questions we're going to answer, how much weight we should give to each question. And I'll kind of try and come up beforehand with a plan of what I'm going to do for the day. And I always spend the whole 24 hours. I know everyone can't do that, but I spend the whole time, every time.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if everyone should do that. It's not very healthy, but if you can, then why not?
I think it depends, doesn't it? Like, do you have a cluster of 24-hour exams that you have to work on at the same time?
So
because
I had that, and that wasn't good.
How many, like, what's the largest number of exams you had at the same time?
I think 4.
So that would be like, so would it be like 4 separate days or 24 hours?
Oh, sorry, no, they would never overlap. That's separate days.
So that could be potentially 4 full days when you don't get any sleep. But I mean, so my thinking is, if you had to do it just the one time for the one block of 24 hours, it'd probably be okay just as a one-off. But like, if you then had to do that 4 times, like in the same week or something, then maybe not so much.
I think it depends on how you can even do, how you go about answering an essay, because it takes me a really long time to decide what I'm going to do. So it's not like I'm writing for the whole 24 hours. Some people already can just go straight into it and do it. And if you can do that, I think get it done as quick as you can, go back to it the next day or hours later, go over it and keep doing that. But I had to spend a really long time just deciding what I'm going to write. I already know what aspect of the module I'm going to do it on, because I'll usually say you answer on 2 weeks worth of, so you'll pick 2 subject matters that you want to talk about. So I already have gone over that in my mind. But I sit and I think about how I'm going to answer it, and I'll look at what I've written down on my notes, I'll look at my readings, I'll just keep going over all the stuff that I've got prepared and then decide how I'm going to answer it. And then during the last like 12 hours, that's when I'll be writing, editing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a bit intense.
That's very intense.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest everyone do the same thing.
So I have been, sitting with people, lecturers who have been designing these exams or this type of thing. And their point of view has always been, this is a 3-hour exam. We don't want students to be doing this for the whole 24 hours.
they do say that as well, but I'm like, I know, but I can't not. I can't not spend time.
Yeah. So it's difficult.
You're very motivated and you're naturally very analytical, aren't you?
I would say that that's fair, yeah.
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 Okay, you mentioned that, for a lot of your course mates, they get like the exam questions and they go straight into writing it. Do you know kind of what kind of grades they're getting using that approach?
About a 2-1.
Okay.
Usually around 2-1.
And so you were, just because you kind of mentioned like, getting the kind of grades that you want through group work and stuff like that, like what kind of grades do you get?
Usually at first, usually in the 70s. I've got an 80 before. That was good.
That's very good.
I try not to go below a 2-1. I want to with the first.
So okay, so I mean, I took a bit of a leap of faith by asking you that question, and it's come out kind of as I'd hoped. Phew. Yeah, so kind of like in my experience, I do often find that students who sort of rush to answer a question, a lot of them, they read a topic and they're just like, okay, I know the answer to this, and they start writing straight away. Now a 2-1 is a perfectly respectable grade. There's nothing wrong with that, but that is often what you end up with. I would say it wouldn't really make a first, because just the implication of that approach, like kind of rushing into it without kind of planning and reflecting a little bit and stuff, and like really analyzing like what is at play here, often means that you don't kind of reach that higher level in terms of criticality. Would you say so, Alex?
Oh, definitely.
But yeah, it can produce a perfectly respectable grade. Like a 2-1 is fine, if it's what you're happy with. Yeah, so I mean, that's all I was going to say about that, really. But also, Kia, you mentioned earlier on about how much planning you do, and then you kind of said that towards the end, like the writing flows very smoothly for you a lot of the time. And I think that's also one of the benefits to working the way that you do. Once you've analyzed, you kind of collated all the information, you've interacted with like, the kind of current scholarly debates, like where you stand when it comes to the topic that you're engaging with. So from there, the writing does flow much more easily because you know exactly what you want to say. So for people who kind of think that the writing up process is like really hard and a slog, very often it's a sign that more planning could have taken place earlier on to make the process easier.
More links between different areas, more analysis.
But also just being clear in your mind, like where you stand on a topic. There are always going to be times when students will struggle, and a university degree is quite a difficult thing to undertake. Have you got any advice to, other students on how to deal with these challenges? Like, are there any things you would have kind of told yourself in your first year with the benefit of experience now?
Yeah, I think I try to, whenever I would struggle, I kind of hide the fact that I was struggling. I think you kind of feel like everyone else is doing well, or you, even if you don't know, because you don't necessarily talk to your friends about every grade you've got, so you assume they have from what they've said. But I think it's good to be open with your friends or with your family or whoever it is that you go to for support. To be like, I'm really, really struggling now, because you'll realize that this isn't uncommon. I feel like everyone is struggling at some point, usually at the same time. Especially if they're on the same course as you. But also there's usually people at uni that are there to help, and it's kind of like hard to speak to people. I understand that, but when you do, you realize that everyone just wants you to succeed. So it's good to reach out to the support team, however that may be. I think there's a health and well-being team usually that will help you if you're going through something. So I would suggest to do that.
And then there's academic support quite often. So might be librarians or study skills advisors.
Or personal tutor, module leader.
So personal tutors can be very helpful in terms of they have the insight into your discipline, your subject area, and how things are done there specifically. So do make use of all these resources that are available.
And I mean, this is something we said before, like one of the kind of key sort of premises of a university education is independent learning. And you'll often hear that, at university you're expected to be more of an independent learner than before. And it's quite common for students to interpret that as, oh, this means I need to do everything myself. And that is not true. The independent side of things is, like Kia has said before, you kind of figure out what aspects of the course or what aspects of a discipline you're interested in, and try and take things in that sort of direction. But there are people always to kind of support you along the way, and you should always ask for help. It doesn't matter how late. Although, if you leave things a little bit too late, you might struggle a bit. But like, for example, last week I had a request from a student who kind of asked us when he could start his dissertation. This was on a Friday. And I mean, I felt for him, because most master students are getting ready to submit around this time of year. So I think he was a bit behind. So I just quickly told him, so he wasn't kind of waiting till the next week for an appointment. I just kind of quickly said, if you've got your module handbook and you've got your assessment guidance, you can start from then. And I don't really know what came of that request, but hopefully he got the message and has, set things in motion to complete his dissertation. So yes, ask for help. It doesn't matter how late, there's always something we can do, or, the various teams in universities can do to help you. And Kia is right. People do want you to succeed.
So thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm.
We hope you found this useful. We've certainly enjoyed having a discussion and getting to grips with study skills in quite a lot of depth. So I hope you appreciate that learning to research and work and think at university is a lot more complex than just writing an essay or whatever.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time and effort and development over the course of your degree.
Yeah, and I hope you found it really valuable having Kia's insight as well as a student. We've certainly enjoyed talking to you about all these issues and kind of seeing things from your lens.
Thank you for having me.
So in our most recent episodes, we've mentioned how to navigate your reading list, and this episode has been on study tips. So this is a good time to remind you that we mentioned a free webinar in our previous episode, episode 6, on navigating your reading list. Many of you will already have received information about your first assignment since the start of this academic year. So we really want to get in early and help you with it, so you don't waste lots of time finding unsuitable resources, reading irrelevant material, and feeling overwhelmed. As I've said before, analyzing your essay topic is the most effective way to help you understand what resources you need to read, exactly what evidence you're looking for, how to critically engage with it, and it will even start to give you clarity on how to structure your assignments. If you want to be on your way to starting your first class essay, then click on the link in our show notes to sign up now. And remember, if you send us the topic you're working on at the moment, we'll even apply the principles we're teaching to your assignment. So get in touch. All the links to sign up and contact us are in our show notes. We can't wait to help you with starting your first class essay at our workshop. And if you can't make it live, don't worry, the workshop will be available for a limited time so you can catch up on the replay. See you there. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
You have been listening to the Weird Learning Podcast with Dr. Tracy Dix and Dr. Alex Patel, with special guest Kia Morant. Music by Defect Machine from Pixabay. Produced by Kelly Costigan.